My wife said, "Don't wait up tonight," with the same casual tone she'd used to ask me to pick up milk from the store. Michelle was standing in our kitchen, adjusting her blazer in the reflection of the microwave door, preparing for what she called another crucial business meeting with her new consulting partner Derek. I'd been an insurance adjuster for 6 years, long enough to recognize when someone was building a case with convenient details that didn't quite add up. "Derek and I need to finalize the strategy for the Morrison account," she explained, checking her phone for the third time in 5 minutes. "You know how these startup consulting firms work? Everything's urgent, everything's a crisis that needs immediate attention." The way she said Derek's name had changed over the past 2 months. Before, it was professional and distant. Now there was this underlying energy, like she was talking about her favorite movie star. I noticed she'd started wearing perfume to these evening meetings, the expensive kind she usually saved for special occasions. "Another late night," I said, stirring my coffee. "That's the 4th one this week." Michelle had always been ambitious about her career, but this sudden surge of after-hours dedication felt different. When she first told me about the consulting opportunity, I'd been genuinely excited for her. Michelle had been restless in her previous marketing job, complaining about uninspired colleagues and limited growth potential. Derek's business coaching firm seemed like exactly the kind of challenge she'd been craving. "Building something meaningful takes sacrifice," she replied, grabbing her keys. "Derek says most people aren't willing to put in the real work necessary for success. They settle for mediocre because extraordinary requires commitment." These weren't Michelle's usual words. She'd been incorporating Derek's business philosophy into casual conversation like she was auditioning for a motivational seminar. Last week, she'd criticized my static mindset about my insurance job, suggesting I lacked the vision to understand what true professional growth looked like. I walked to the window and watched her drive away in the Honda we'd bought together 3 years ago, right after we'd started seriously discussing buying a house. Our 5th wedding anniversary was next month, and I'd been planning something special, something that would remind us both why we'd fallen in love in the first place. Michelle used to appreciate my thoughtful approach to celebrations, the way I'd remember small details and create meaningful experiences. Now she seemed impatient with anything that didn't involve exponential growth or revolutionary thinking. Later that evening, I decided to check our shared credit card statements online, something I'd been avoiding because I trusted Michelle to handle our finances responsibly. What I found made my stomach drop. 3 charges at Vintners Reserve, an upscale wine bar downtown that specialized in pairings and intimate atmosphere. Each charge was for 2 people, always on nights when Michelle claimed to be working late. The dates coincided perfectly with her business meetings. I'd suggested we try that place for our anniversary last year, but Michelle had said it was too expensive for a casual dinner. Apparently, business expenses justified different standards. The most recent charge was from 2 nights ago, the same evening Michelle had come home energized and distracted, talking excitedly about breakthrough strategies and innovative approaches. She'd been glowing in a way I hadn't seen in months, practically vibrating with excitement about the future of their consulting venture. I'd assumed it was professional satisfaction, the kind of fulfillment that comes from meaningful work with a supportive partner. Now I understood the energy had nothing to do with business development and everything to do with the intoxicating rush of secret romance disguised as professional ambition. I decided to drive by Michelle's supposed work location the next evening, telling myself I was just being thorough in my investigation. Professional skepticism was part of my job as an insurance adjuster, and something about Michelle's story wasn't adding up to the evidence I'd been collecting. Derek's consulting firm supposedly operated out of a shared workspace downtown, but when I arrived at the address Michelle had given me, the building was completely dark except for a 24-hour fitness center on the ground floor. Her Honda was nowhere in sight, which meant either she'd lied about the location or the meeting had moved to somewhere more convenient for whatever they were really doing. I drove slowly through the upscale district where Vintners Reserve was located, and there it was, Michelle's car parked directly in front of the wine bar. Through the large windows, I could see her sitting at a corner table with a man who had to be Derek. They weren't hunched over business documents or laptops. Instead, Michelle was leaning forward with that animated expression she used to reserve for our most intimate conversations, while Derek gestured confidently with his wine glass. The body language was unmistakably romantic, all lingering eye contact and synchronized laughter. I watched them for 10 minutes, long enough to see Derek reach across the table to touch Michelle's hand, and long enough to watch her blush like a teenager on her first date. That's definitely not a business meeting, I said to myself, taking photos with my phone before driving home. The evidence was building into an undeniable case, but I needed more information about Derek and his so-called consulting business. I started checking Michelle's social media more carefully, something I'd never felt the need to do during our marriage because I trusted her completely. Her recent posts had shifted from family photos and work updates to inspirational quotes about breaking free from limiting beliefs and surrounding yourself with people who challenge you to grow. The comment section revealed she'd been subtly criticizing my lack of ambition to mutual friends, describing me as someone who was comfortable with the status quo and resistant to change. Our neighbor Kate worked in business consulting for environmental firms, so I decided to ask her opinion about Derek's company during our usual weekend conversation over the fence. Kate was one of those genuinely friendly people who remembered details about everyone's lives and always asked thoughtful follow-up questions. "I've never heard of his firm," she said, frowning thoughtfully. "What's the company name again?" When I told her, she pulled out her phone and started searching professional networks. "That's weird. Derek Morrison has profiles on 3 different business platforms with completely different company affiliations. Either he's incredibly busy, or he's not quite what he seems." Kate's research revealed that Derek had a pattern of targeting married women in professional transitions, offering them business coaching and partnership opportunities that never materialized into actual ventures. "He's been reported by the Better Business Bureau in 2 other cities," she told me, showing me the complaints on her phone. Multiple women claimed he took money for business development that never happened. The pattern is always the same. He identifies women who feel undervalued in their careers or marriages, promises them exciting opportunities, then disappears once he's gotten what he wants. The pieces were falling into place, and none of them painted Derek as the brilliant entrepreneur Michelle believed him to be. When I checked our joint savings account that evening, I discovered Michelle had been transferring money to something called Strategic Growth Consulting over the past 6 weeks. Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger sums that totaled almost $8,000. Money we'd been saving for a down payment on our dream house had been quietly funding Michelle's fantasy of becoming a successful entrepreneur with her charming business partner. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been planning our anniversary celebration and thinking about our future together, Michelle had been investing our shared resources into a relationship with a man who specialized in exploiting women exactly like her. I sat in our living room that night, surrounded by evidence of Michelle's deception and Derek's manipulation, trying to process how thoroughly I'd been betrayed. The woman I'd married had not only been lying to me for months but had been actively participating in financing her own affair while criticizing my character to our friends. Tomorrow I would need to decide how to confront the situation, but tonight I just felt the profound sadness of realizing that the person I'd trusted most in the world had been systematically destroying everything we'd built together. I called Kate the next morning and asked if she wanted to grab coffee, ostensibly to thank her for the research help but really because I needed to talk to someone who understood the business world and wouldn't immediately tell me to lawyer up or throw Michelle's clothes out the window. Kate suggested this quiet cafe downtown that she said served actual good coffee instead of the corporate chain stuff. When I arrived, she was already there with a small notebook, looking genuinely concerned about my situation in a way that reminded me how long it had been since someone had really listened to my problems. "I've been thinking about your anniversary," Kate said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "You mentioned wanting to do something special, and honestly, after what Michelle's putting you through, you deserve to celebrate the kind of man you actually are instead of letting her narrative define you." The way she said it wasn't bitter or vindictive, just matter-of-fact, like she was stating an obvious truth that everyone else had somehow missed. "What were you originally planning?" I told her about my idea for a surprise dinner at the restaurant where Michelle and I had our first date, followed by a weekend trip to the cabin where I'd proposed. Kate nodded approvingly. "That's incredibly thoughtful. Most people would just buy expensive jewelry and call it romance." Our coffee meeting stretched into lunch, then an afternoon walk through the park where Kate asked me detailed questions about my work that no one had bothered with in months. She wanted to know about specific cases I'd handled, the investigative techniques I used, how I balanced empathy with professional objectivity when dealing with people's worst moments. Michelle always said insurance work was boring, I admitted, like I was just pushing papers around instead of doing anything meaningful. Kate stopped walking and looked at me with genuine surprise. Are you kidding? You help people rebuild their lives after disasters. You're literally the person who determines whether someone gets to start over or gets financially destroyed. That's fascinating. I found myself telling Kate about cases that had stuck with me, families I'd helped navigate complex claims, the satisfaction of finding coverage for someone who thought they'd lost everything. She listened with the kind of focused attention I'd forgotten was possible, asking follow-up questions that showed she was actually processing what I said instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. You know what's crazy? She said as we sat on a bench overlooking the pond. Michelle's been telling people you lack ambition, but what you're describing sounds like someone who genuinely cares about doing good work well. That's not lacking ambition. That's having integrity. When Kate suggested we start planning something special for my anniversary regardless of Michelle's behavior, I initially resisted the idea. It felt weird to celebrate a marriage that was clearly falling apart, but Kate framed it differently. You're not celebrating Michelle, she explained. You're celebrating 5 years of being a devoted husband who deserved better treatment. You're proving to yourself that your thoughtful nature has value, even if she can't see it. She offered to help me plan something that would showcase exactly the kind of person I was, the attention to detail and genuine care that Michelle had been taking for granted. Over the next week, Kate and I met several times to coordinate what became an elaborate anniversary surprise involving our favorite restaurant, a custom playlist of songs that had significance in my relationship with Michelle, and a photo book documenting our best memories together. Kate helped me track down the wine we'd shared on our wedding night and even contacted the florist who'd done our wedding arrangements. The process revealed how much Kate had been paying attention to my marriage over the years, remembering details about Michelle's preferences that I'd mentioned in passing during neighborhood conversations. Can I ask you something? Kate said during one of our planning sessions at her kitchen table, surrounded by printouts and reservation confirmations. How long have you been making yourself smaller to accommodate Michelle's criticism? The question caught me off guard, but as I thought about it, I realized I'd been unconsciously apologizing for my personality for months, treating my reliability and thoughtfulness as character flaws instead of strengths. I used to be proud of the way I approached relationships, I admitted. Michelle made me feel like caring too much was somehow pathetic. Kate shook her head firmly. The right person would treasure that about you. What Michelle calls boring, someone else would call dependable. What she calls unambitious, someone else would call grounded. That evening, as Kate walked me to my car after another planning session, she stopped and looked directly at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Josh, I need to tell you something I probably should have said months ago. I've been watching Michelle take you for granted, and it's been driving me crazy because I can see exactly how amazing you are. You deserve someone who appreciates your thoughtfulness instead of resenting it. The confession hung in the air between us, and I realized that what I'd been interpreting as neighborly concern had been something deeper, someone who'd been silently rooting for me while my own wife had been systematically tearing me down. 3 days before our anniversary, Kate called me with urgent news that would change everything I thought I knew about Derek's business coaching operation. Josh, you need to see this, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. I've been digging deeper into Derek's background, and it's so much worse than we thought. She discovered that Derek Morrison wasn't even his real name. He was actually David Mitchell, a man who'd been running romance and financial scams across multiple states for the past 4 years, specifically targeting married women going through career transitions or personal dissatisfaction. Kate had connected with 3 other women through business consulting forums who'd fallen victim to Derek's manipulation. They're willing to talk, she told me as we met at her kitchen table, now covered with printed emails, screenshots, and timeline documents. The pattern is identical every time. He identifies women who feel undervalued, promises them business partnerships and personal growth, then gradually extracts money while destroying their marriages. Sarah from Portland had lost $12,000 and her husband, before discovering Derek, was simultaneously running the same scam on 4 other women in her city. Jennifer from Seattle had mortgaged her house to fund Derek's fake consulting venture before learning he'd never filed any business paperwork. The most devastating revelation came from Rebecca in Denver, who'd been Derek's partner for 8 months before discovering his elaborate deception. He had spreadsheets, she told us during our video call, her voice still shaking with humiliation. Detailed profiles of every woman he was targeting, including their financial information, marriage problems, and psychological vulnerabilities. I wasn't his girlfriend. I was inventory. Rebecca explained that Derek studied each woman's social media, identified their insecurities, then crafted a persona design to make them feel special and understood while systematically isolating them from their support systems. He told me my husband was holding me back from my potential, Rebecca continued, tears streaming down her face. He convinced me that leaving my marriage was necessary for personal growth, that staying loyal to someone who didn't appreciate my ambition was self-sabotage. Meanwhile, he was telling the exact same story to women in 3 other cities. The business coaching was completely fictional. Derek had no professional credentials, no successful clients, no legitimate consulting experience. His entire operation was designed to exploit women's professional insecurities while bleeding them financially and emotionally. Kate's research revealed that Derek had already started preparing to leave town, just like he'd done in Portland, Seattle, and Denver when his schemes began unraveling. His lease on that shared workspace ends next week, Kate discovered through her professional network. He's been telling different women that he's expanding to New York, Los Angeles, and Miami, depending on which story fits their particular fantasy. Michelle had no idea she was dating a professional con artist who'd been playing an elaborate character designed specifically to manipulate her vulnerabilities. When I showed Kate the latest charges on our credit card, she immediately recognized the pattern. "Look at the timing," she pointed out, creating a timeline on her laptop. Every expensive dinner coincides with him asking for money for business development. He's conditioning her to associate romantic gestures with financial investment. She thinks she's funding their future together, but she's really just paying for the privilege of being conned. The psychological manipulation was so sophisticated that Michelle probably believed she was making smart business decisions while Derek systematically drained our savings account. The final piece of evidence came when Rebecca forwarded us screenshots of Derek's real social media accounts, the ones he used to communicate with his actual partners in crime. "He's already lined up his next target," she warned us. "A divorced real estate agent in Phoenix who just received a substantial settlement. He's been grooming her online for weeks, using the same business coaching approach that worked on all of us." Derek wasn't just a cheating boyfriend. He was a predator who specialized in financially and emotionally destroying women who were brave enough to pursue their dreams. I stared at the evidence spread across Kate's table, feeling a mixture of rage and protective instinct I'd never experienced before. Michelle might have betrayed our marriage, but she was still being victimized by someone who'd made a career of exploiting women's hopes and vulnerabilities. "We have to warn her," I told Kate. "Even after everything she's done, she doesn't deserve to be financially destroyed by a professional criminal." Kate nodded grimly. "The question is whether she'll believe us or if Derek's manipulation runs too deep for her to see the truth." Michelle came home early from what was supposed to be an overnight business retreat with Derek, her key rattling in the lock at 7:30 on our anniversary evening instead of the next morning as planned. I heard her footsteps in the hallway, then a sudden stop as she processed the scene in our dining room. Kate and I were sitting at the table with anniversary planning materials spread between us, including the photo book, restaurant reservations, and the custom playlist I'd created. The expression on Michelle's face shifted from confusion to shock to pure fury in the span of about 3 seconds. "What the hell is this?" Michelle demanded, her voice sharp with accusation and disbelief. She stood in the doorway clutching an overnight bag, her hair disheveled and her makeup smudged like she'd been crying or arguing. "Josh, why is our neighbor sitting at our dining room table with what looks like romantic planning materials? And why are you two acting like some kind of couple?" The irony of her outrage wasn't lost on me, considering she'd just returned from her own romantic getaway, but I could see the genuine panic in her eyes as she tried to process what she was witnessing. "Michelle, we need to talk," I said calmly, gesturing to an empty chair. "Kate's been helping me plan our anniversary celebration, but we've also discovered some important information about Derek that you need to hear." Michelle's face went pale, and she gripped her overnight bag tighter. "Information about Derek? What kind of information? And why would you be discussing my business partner with her?" The defensive tone told me everything I needed to know about how deeply Derek's manipulation had taken hold. She was already preparing to protect him instead of listening to evidence. Kate leaned forward with the folder of documentation we'd prepared. "Michelle, Derek isn't who he claims to be. His real name is David Mitchell, and he's been running romance and financial scams on married women across multiple states. We have testimonies from 3 other victims and evidence of his criminal pattern." Michelle's reaction was immediate and explosive. "You've been investigating Derek? Behind my back? Josh, this is absolutely insane. You're stalking my business partner because you're jealous of my success and trying to sabotage my career with ridiculous conspiracy theories." "Look at the evidence," I said, pushing the folder toward her. "Bank records, testimonies from other women, documentation of his fake business credentials. Michelle, you're being conned by a professional criminal who specializes in targeting women exactly like you." Michelle slammed her hand on the table, sending papers flying. "Women exactly like me? What's that supposed to mean? Women who have ambition? Women who want more than settling for boring, mediocre lives with boring, mediocre men." The insult hung in the air between us, and I saw Kate's face tighten with controlled anger on my behalf. "It means women going through career transitions who feel undervalued in their marriages," Kate said quietly, her professional voice cutting through Michelle's emotional outburst. "Women who are vulnerable to manipulation because they're seeking validation and new opportunities. Derek preys on those specific psychological vulnerabilities." Michelle turned her fury toward Kate with laser focus. "Who asked you to get involved in my marriage? You have no right to interfere in my relationship or my business decisions. This is between Josh and me, not some desperate neighbor who's been waiting for an opportunity to break us up." The accusation revealed more about Michelle's mindset than she probably intended. In her narrative, any woman who showed interest in me had to be desperate, because what else would motivate someone to pursue a boring, unambitious man like her husband? "Michelle, Kate's been trying to help protect you from financial fraud," I said, my patience finally wearing thin. "While you've been secretly draining our savings account to fund Derek's fake business venture and lying to me about working late, she's been doing actual research to uncover the truth about your supposed business partner." Michelle's face crumpled as she realized that I knew about the money transfers and the fake work meetings. "You've been spying on my finances? Tracking my movements? Josh, this is controlling, abusive behavior. You're making me feel like a prisoner in my own marriage." The gaslighting was impressive in its audacity. She was reframing my discovery of her affair and financial betrayal as evidence of my psychological problems. "Derek warned me that you might react this way when I started becoming more independent and successful. He said insecure men always try to sabotage their wives' growth." Kate stood up abruptly, her composure finally cracking. "Michelle, Derek has been telling you exactly what he told Rebecca in Denver, Sarah in Portland, and Jennifer in Seattle. Word for word. You're not special to him. You're not his business partner. You're not going to build a consulting empire together. You're inventory in his romance scam operation, and he's been systematically destroying your marriage while stealing your money." The brutal honesty of Kate's words seemed to penetrate Michelle's defensive shell, and for a moment, I saw doubt flicker across her face before the denial reasserted itself. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Michelle said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. "You've both lost your minds with jealousy and paranoia. Derek and I have built something real together, something meaningful. Just because you can't understand ambitious people doesn't mean we're criminals." She gathered her overnight bag and headed toward the stairs. "I'm calling Derek right now to tell him about this insane harassment, and then I'm staying at Ashley's place until you both come to your senses and apologize for this disgusting invasion of privacy." As she stormed upstairs, I heard her dialing Derek's number, about to discover that her business partner and lover had already moved on to his next victim. The muffled sound of Michelle's phone calls from our bedroom grew increasingly frantic over the next hour, and I could hear her voice rising with each unanswered attempt to reach Derek. When she finally came downstairs, her face was a mixture of confusion and barely controlled panic. "Derek's not answering his phone," she announced, as if this was somehow our fault. "He's probably just busy with client meetings or dealing with the Phoenix expansion we discussed yesterday." The rationalization was automatic, but I could see the doubt creeping in around the edges. Her hands were shaking slightly as she clutched her phone. Kate and I exchanged glances, and I made the decision to show Michelle the screenshots Rebecca had forwarded us from Derek's real social media accounts. "Michelle, Derek's already in Phoenix," I said gently, pulling up the photos on my laptop. "He's been posting from there for 2 days, and he's with the divorced real estate agent we told you about. His next victim." The images showed Derek at upscale restaurants and hotels with an attractive blonde woman who was clearly smitten with his charm, just like Michelle had been 3 months ago. Michelle stared at the screen for a long moment, her face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and finally devastation. "But we had dinner 2 nights ago," she whispered. "He told me he loved me. He said we were going to announce our partnership at next week's business networking event. We have reservations at that expensive steakhouse downtown." The reality was sinking in, and I watched her carefully constructed fantasy crumble in real time. "He was supposed to meet me this morning to finalize the contracts for our consulting firm." "There are no contracts," Kate said softly, showing Michelle the documentation from the Better Business Bureau complaints. "There never was a consulting firm. Derek is a professional con artist who targets married women, extracts money from them through fake business opportunities, then disappears when the scheme runs its course. You're not his first victim, and unfortunately, you won't be his last." Michelle read through the testimonies with growing horror, recognizing her own experience in every detail of Rebecca's, Sarah's, and Jennifer's stories. The breaking point came when Michelle called Derek's shared workspace and discovered that his lease had been terminated 3 days earlier, with no forwarding information provided. The receptionist confirmed that David Mitchell, his real name, had cleared out his office and disappeared without notice, leaving behind only unpaid bills and confused clients who'd been expecting business meetings that would never happen. "Ma'am, are you one of the women he was coaching?" the receptionist asked sympathetically. "Because you're the 5th person who's called looking for him this week." Michelle's revenge campaign began that night with a series of increasingly unhinged social media posts about Josh's emotional affair with Kate and his controlling, abusive behavior during their marriage. She created elaborate narratives about how I'd been systematically undermining her career ambitions and isolating her from potential business opportunities out of jealousy and insecurity. "My husband couldn't handle my success," she posted on Facebook, "so he recruited our neighbor to help him sabotage my professional relationships with lies and harassment." The campaign escalated when Michelle contacted my insurance company with false allegations that I'd been using work resources to conduct personal investigations into Kate's business, not knowing that Kate had never been a client and that my research into Derek was entirely separate from my professional responsibilities. My supervisor called me into his office the next morning, more bemused than concerned. "Josh, your wife left 3 voicemails claiming you've been stalking your neighbor and using company computers for personal vendettas. I assume there's more to this story?" Michelle's attempts to destroy Kate's professional reputation were equally misguided and transparent. She created fake online reviews for Kate's environmental consulting firm, claiming that Kate was unethical, unprofessional, and involved in inappropriate relationships with married men. The reviews were so obviously vindictive that they were removed within days, but not before Kate's actual clients had rallied to her defense with genuine testimonials about her integrity and expertise. "I've worked with Kate for 3 years," one client posted, "and these accusations are clearly from someone with a personal grudge rather than professional experience." The final catastrophic error in Michelle's revenge campaign came when she decided to publicly confront Kate and me at our neighborhood barbecue, an annual event where everyone gathered in the community park for food and socializing. Michelle arrived uninvited and visibly agitated, immediately launching into a loud, dramatic speech about betrayal and manipulation that drew the attention of every neighbor within a 3-block radius. These two have been having an affair behind my back while pretending to be concerned about my welfare, she announced to the stunned crowd. Unfortunately for Michelle, several neighbors had witnessed her own behavior with Derek over the past few months and were more than willing to share their observations. Tom from 3 houses down mentioned seeing Michelle and Derek together at expensive restaurants during times she'd claimed to be working late. Sarah across the street confirmed that she'd watched Derek pick Michelle up from our house multiple times when my car was clearly gone. The community support shifted decisively away from Michelle as people realized she was projecting her own infidelity onto an obviously innocent friendship. "Michelle, honey," our elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson said kindly but firmly, "we've all seen you with that young man for months now. Maybe it's time to take some responsibility for your own choices instead of blaming Josh for trying to save your marriage." The public humiliation was complete when Michelle broke down crying and admitted to the entire gathering that Derek had stolen $8,000 from her savings account and disappeared without explanation. Instead of sympathy, the admission only confirmed everyone's suspicions about her character and judgment, leaving her isolated and defensive in a community that had previously respected her. Michelle's public breakdown at the neighborhood barbecue became the final turning point in our social circle's perception of our marriage crisis. Within days, mutual friends who had initially been confused by her accusations were reaching out to offer their support and apologize for doubting my character. "We had no idea Michelle was having an affair," our friend Lisa told me over coffee. "When she started posting about your controlling behavior, we thought maybe there were problems we hadn't seen. But after hearing the whole story from other neighbors, it's obvious she was projecting her own guilt onto you and Kate." Derek's brief reappearance in our lives came through a threatening phone call to Michelle that I unfortunately overheard during one of her attempts to retrieve more of her belongings from our house. "Stop calling me," his voice carried through her speakerphone, cold and dismissive. "What we had was business, nothing more. You were a client who got too emotionally invested in a professional relationship. Find a therapist and move on with your life." The casual cruelty in his voice was exactly what Rebecca had described from her own experience with his abandonment tactics. Kate and I spent the following months gradually transitioning from neighbors helping each other through a crisis to genuinely dating with the full support of our community. The planning sessions that had started as anniversary preparation for my marriage with Michelle evolved into real dates where Kate and I discovered we shared similar values about building relationships on mutual respect and genuine partnership. "I love how you approach everything with such careful thought," Kate told me during one of our evening walks. Michelle was crazy to see that as a character flaw instead of recognizing what a gift it is. 6 months after Michelle moved out to stay with her sister in another state, Kate and I were engaged, and I found myself planning the kind of proposal that showcased exactly the thoughtful attention to detail that my ex-wife had found so suffocating. I recreated our first coffee date at the cafe where Kate had helped me process Michelle's betrayal, complete with the same table, the same order, and a custom photo book documenting our friendship's evolution into love. "This is perfect," Kate said through happy tears, examining the ring I'd chosen based on months of observing her jewelry preferences. "You see me so clearly." Michelle's attempts to rebuild her reputation in her new city were reportedly struggling, according to updates from mutual friends who occasionally heard from her sister. The financial damage from Derek's scam had forced her to move back in with family, take an entry-level position with a significant pay cut, and attend therapy to process the emotional manipulation she'd experienced. "She asks about you sometimes," her sister mentioned to Lisa during a chance encounter. "I think she realizes what she lost, but she's too proud to admit she was wrong about everything." The restaurant where I'd originally planned to take Michelle for our anniversary became the location where Kate and I celebrated our engagement 6 months later, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had watched our relationship develop from mutual support through community crisis to genuine romance. Mrs. Patterson made a toast that perfectly captured the irony of the situation. Sometimes life has to break down completely before it can rebuild itself into something better. Josh and Kate found each other because they were both brave enough to do the right thing when it mattered most. Derek never faced any legal consequences for his romance scams, as proving financial fraud in intimate relationships remained nearly impossible without extensive evidence that most victims were too embarrassed to pursue. Rebecca started a support group for women who'd been targeted by romance scammers, and Kate occasionally shared resources from that organization with other neighbors who mentioned suspicious dating situations. "The best revenge," Kate often said, "is living well and helping other people avoid the same traps." A year after our divorce was finalized, Michelle sent me a brief email that simply said, "I'm sorry for everything. You deserved better, and I hope you're happy." I showed the message to Kate, and we both agreed that responding would serve no purpose beyond potentially reopening wounds that had already healed. Michelle's acknowledgement of her mistakes was probably genuine, but it came too late to repair the damage she'd caused and couldn't change the fact that Kate and I had built something infinitely better together than what I'd ever had with my ex-wife.